Hey everyone, Harold Fisher here, anchor and host of the Daily Drum on WHUR. I'm back with another edition of HUR at Home on WHUR.com and all of our social media platforms. We all are quite familiar with the work nonprofit organizations do in our communities. They take care of so many things, fill in the gaps that governments and private industry often cannot. But who or what takes care of nonprofits, giving them the support they need to do the work they do? Well, tonight, we explore part of that answer with Ruth LaToison Ifill, President and CEO of the Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers. Ruth, thanks for talking to us.
Hi, it's so great to be with you today, Harold. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So your organization, Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers, goes by the acronym WRAP.
WRAG.
RAG, excuse me, RAG.
Yep.
RAG, yeah. What does your organization do exactly?
So RAG has been around for about 30 years. Next year will be our 30-year anniversary. And so the organization has really been a hub, if you will, for foundations, right? So folks start nonprofits all the time. If they start this 501c3 and they know that these 501c3s need dollars to move the work forward. And so folks who create foundations become a member of RAG. They pay dues to be a member, but the focus of the organization is really, since 2016, has really been to advance racial equity in our region. So in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, we're focusing on not just social issues, but can we advance social issues with the focus specifically on racial equity, whether it's housing, whether it's food, whether it's immigration? Can we use our dollars to develop relationships with nonprofits that are moving the work in such a way that will change systems in support of racial justice and racial equity?
Give me an example, because we have seen, let's just take housing, for example, which is consistently problematic when it comes to equity, for people of color, for women, for people in the LGBTQ community, for example. So give me an example of how your organization attempts to put the fix in for those organizations to make things better, more equitable for them.
So you want to talk about things like moving the needle, right?
Yes.
So when you look at organizations like the Horning Brothers, it's led by a Black woman by the name of Dara Johnson. She leads that foundation. And so there's a Black woman there, right, who is deciding, where do these grants go and why do they go there? It's a great example of okay, we're going to focus on housing, but who are the organizations that we should be funding that care very deeply about housing, right? And so having a Black woman at that organization means that when you get to the root of the issue, right, she's saying not only am I moving the work, but this work has something to do with me and my story and my struggle. And so there's so many more Black women that are at these foundations now, leading these foundations now, who are moving the work forward. You have Tonya Wellens at the Greater Washington Community Foundation. She lives in Prince George's County and has been moving that work. They have something called the Partnership to End Homelessness. And so the Greater Washington Community Foundation is taking funds and dollars from folks in this region, right? And then granting it out to the nonprofits that are doing the work on the ground. And so you want to look at, well, who's at this foundation? Do the people at this foundation actually look like me? Do they sound like me? Do they talk like me? Are they from where I'm from? And do they understand what it means to change the work in this region? And so Horning Brothers, Greater Washington Community Foundation, they're both being led by Black women, but there's lots more in this region that we would not know of previously. You have Lori Jackson at the Jane Bancroft Robinson Foundation, a Black woman who is focusing her dollars at a foundation on Ward 7 and Ward 8, period. She's not being questionable about it. She's not saying like, oh, well, we just want to fund everyone. She's saying, no, I want to go to the most under-resourced communities. And they're focusing on cancer. They're focusing on workforce development. They're focusing on the areas that matter most to us. And they're doing it from a racial justice lens. They're saying it's not just enough for people to have a lot of money in this region. But in order for those funds to be working in partnership with us, we have to do two things, right? One, we have to move those funds to the regions and to the neighborhoods that matter the most or that are under-resourced. But then also, two, we have to advocate with government who make the decisions about where those funds go.
So what role do you play? Are you the go-between between the nonprofits and the foundations? Do you help direct the money? Because I mean, let's be honest, people think when you say foundations, you think a lot of money, okay? And we're not talking about a few $100,000 here and there. We're talking about millions of dollars, old money that some of the people that are either managing or who are parts of the families of these foundations have the power, have the wherewithal to essentially say, I'm going to put it here. They're going to say, bibbidi bobbidi boo. It's going to be here. Okay. And so what is your role as it relates to these foundations and the nonprofits that eventually get the check?
So WRAG is a membership association, right? Like these foundations pay dues to be a part of our organization, if you will, right? They pay dues to be a member of WRAG. But because WRAG developed a commitment towards racial equity in 2016 and then advanced that again in 2018 as a continuing commitment, when folks pay dues to be a member of WRAG, it means that our partnership, our relationships, and the things that we advance, our webinars, things like that, they have to be focused on what matters most in the community. And so because folks have developed a commitment to WRAG, they've developed a commitment to racial equity. You cannot be a member of WRAG and not also believe that racial equity is important for our region. And so we have organizations that are part of our membership. They're all foundations, but they're focusing in a way, right, on things that change, make systemic change in our space. So I'll give you an example. Kira Jarrett, another Black woman who's leading the DC Bar Foundation. Harold, I'm giving you like a whole list of folks who you should be interviewing. You have Kira Jarrett, who's over the DC Bar Foundation. And the DC Bar Foundation is really looking into civil legal aid, right? It's like, if you have one legal issue, you have another. And so how do we create an ecosystem that says, like, if you have a housing need, if you have a legal need, a child support need, you know, whatever, are we funding it and creating a space where you can go to one place? The problem is that we continue to punish the poor in the region. And there is this like nonprofit world that exists in order to help you to navigate that space. But then there's this foundation space, right? And the foundations are the ones who are giving money, and they get to decide basically based on the money that they're giving who's worthy and who's not. And so when you look at organizations that are being led by some of the Black women in this region, you realize that they're focusing on things that actually matter to people who are doing their work and living their lives day to day, right? Another example would be Unique Redwood at the Consumer Health Foundation. Her focus on guaranteed income, creating a pilot with Amalgamated Bank, Greater Washington Community Foundation, and WRAG that says, we believe that people deserve to have money. And if you just give them funds, right? You give people who need funds, you give it to them once a month, if you will, for the next 5 years, we could find that they will use it for things that make sense for them instead of them continuing to live in poverty. And believing in the humanity of people is really the focus of the Consumer Health Foundation. But again, another organization led by a Black woman that is doing this work deeply and caring very much about not just the philosophy, if you will, of doing better, but also saying, well, let's put dollars in the hands of the people who have the ideas and who are trusted in their community.
So here's a question. When I hit the lottery for $250 million, and I decide, after, I spend $250 on each wheel for new rims on my Toyota, and get a new dishwasher. I decide that I want to take $10 million and want to move that money to an organization that is helping, returning citizens, for example, find housing. If I join WRAG, then do I just call Ruth and say, Ruth, I want to do this, but I don't know where to begin?
I would say yes and no, right? Like I'm only going to advocate for organizations that are advancing social justice and racial equity in our region, right? Not just in DC, but in Maryland and Virginia. You have Heather Peeler, who's at ACT for Alexandria, and she is leading the charge with racial equity as a community foundation in Alexandria. But when you talk about finding those organizations, right? It's less about like, oh, well, does Ruth or WRAG stamp this organization? It's more about our community organizers and smaller nonprofits working with organizations that we trust. And if they are working with organizations that we trust, where do we go from here, right? So I'll give you an example. Aisha Alexander Young, another Black woman, who is working currently at the Meyer Foundation, has moved on and will be moving on as the CEO of Give Black. This organization says, hey, here are all of the Black-led social change organizations who are doing the work here. The Meyer Foundation has decided that they would create a fund supporting Black-led social change. So any nonprofit that's led by or founded by a Black person could get funding from could get money from this particular fund. And then you have Aisha going on and saying, I have options, right? And she's moved on to Give Black as the CEO. And at this organization, you can find out where are all of the Black-led organizations that are making these changes. Since the murder of George Floyd, you've had so many folks saying, listen, we're in this for the long haul, and we want to be able to not just raise our flags and say that we're upset. We also want to say, well, I want to be involved in what's going to be different here. And so Aisha moving on to Give Black, if you look at giveblack.org, you'll see that there are so many Black-led nonprofits that are deserving of money and that are deserving of your support so that they can advance issues of social justice in our region.
So for those organizations that may have the wherewithal, whether the financial, the altruistic wherewithal, to want to reach out, how can they find out more information about WRAG? Where can they find it on the web? Where can they contact you?
Yeah, I think locally, if you're looking at trying to find out more about social justice, you can go to WashingtonGrantmakers.org.
Let's try that one. Let's try that one more.
WashingtonGrantmakers.org. Sorry, I'm talking fast. Or you can go to WRAG Tweets, WRAG Tweets. Nationally, I would really, ask you to look into APFE. Used to be called the Association of Black Foundation Executives, and now they are really moving social change across the nation, right? And so they're interested in ideas and interested in advancing issues that directly reflect any concerns that Black folks have, whether that be local or national. So I would look at them as well when you're looking at Black-led social change.
Well, Ruth LaToison Ifill, President and CEO of the Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers, WRAG, WRAG. Thank you so much for talking to us, and we appreciate your time and keep doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, Harold. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That is it for this edition of HUR at Home. I'm Harold Fisher, and as always, I'll see you on the radio.